For those not familiar with SSTI, I just want to give you a brief overview. You can find more information on SSTI on our website, which is ssti.us. We are a network of reform-minded state DOTs. We were founded in 2010, and we're housed at the University of Wisconsin. We work in 3 different ways. We are a community of practice where participating agencies can learn together and share experience as they implement innovative state transportation policies. This map does change a little bit. Montana has recently joined us at some of our meetings, so we haven't gotten them up on the map yet, but they should be up there. We're also a source of direct technical information and assistance to agencies on transformative and replicable smart transportation reform efforts. And then we are a resource to the wider transportation community, including local, state, and federal agencies. And this webinar is part of that. We help them in their efforts to reorient practice to changing social and financial demands. I'm very excited about this webinar today. We had a lot of people sign up, and I'm excited to hear what the presenters have to say myself. For years, congestion and auto delay have been used by transportation agencies as sort of the default metrics. But we're starting to see transportation agencies starting to look at accessibility and connectivity, which can measure how easily people can get to their destinations regardless of the transportation mode that they're using. And I think that's really important as we move into a multimodal future for transportation across the country. So I do want to introduce our speakers. Our first speaker will be Andrew Owen. He's the director of the Accessibility Observatory and a research fellow in the Department of Civil Engineering at the University of Minnesota. He leads the development and maintenance. Of tools to calculate nationwide multimodal accessibility to a variety of destination types. The Accessibility Observatory recently published the first in a series of reports about access across America. So I'm sure you can find that on the web. After that, we will hear from Rich Kuzmyak. He's on the staff of Renaissance Planning Group, a planning firm that specializes in integrated transportation and land use planning. He's a transportation planner with over 30 years of experience in travel behavior analysis and attempting to create innovative tools for better planning and decision making. Today he's going to be talking about some recent work he's done for the National Cooperative Highway Research Program that relies on accessibility tools and an ongoing test application for a state DOT in a major corridor. And finally, we'll be hearing from Kate Sylvester. She's a community planner with the Maryland Department of Transportation, and she supports a number of efforts related to multimodal transportation planning, evaluation, and decision making. She's managing MDOT's forays into using multimodal accessibility tool. Before she joined MDOT in December of 2010, she was working in the transportation sector, in private sector transportation planner in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and Baltimore. So I'm going to let our speakers go ahead and take it away. And I'm going to give control of the keyboard to Andrew. And Andrew, you can go ahead and change the slides. You just have to click on it to get control.
All right, thank you very much, Robbie, and thank you to SSTI for the opportunity to talk with everyone today. This is an exciting topic for me, and I hope it's one that you will all find interesting as well. The things that I want to share today are some notes about accessibility in general. What is it? Why is it important? And then I also will show some examples of work that we've recently completed. We're working very closely with the Minnesota Department of Transportation on setting up a national evaluation project that will let us actually measure accessibility across America. So we'll get to see a little bit of information about that as well. I want to jump first to an example to sort of get us grounded and get us a practical handle on the topic of accessibility. What we're looking at here is a map of the state of Minnesota, and for each of the about 240,000 census blocks that make up the state of Minnesota, we've calculated from that point how many jobs can you reach within 40 minutes by driving. In order to do that, we had to pull together very detailed road network information, and then we calculated travel times along that network, and then added up how many jobs could be reached within different travel time thresholds. So when you're looking at this map, and all of the maps in this presentation, the key thing to remember is that each point on these maps is treated as an origin for a number of potential trips. So if you see a point on this map marked in orange or red, that indicates that many jobs, in fact up to millions of jobs, can be reached from that point. If you see a point marked in blue or green, that indicates that only a few jobs can be reached from that point. And you can see that there are some very clear patterns of accessibility. There are strong peaks of accessibility in the metropolitan area of the Twin Cities, and also associated very clearly with highway infrastructure connecting to that core metropolitan area. But then you can also see the same pattern at smaller scales in smaller metropolitan areas across the state, including in Duluth and Rochester and St. Cloud. We'll come back to this and talk more about how these sorts of things are implemented. So this is a look at auto accessibility. We've also taken a look at accessibility to jobs by transit. And for this example, we've zoomed in to the metropolitan area, Minneapolis-St. Paul. And in this case, we can see that the patterns of accessibility, the peaks of orange and red, exist not along roadway corridors necessarily, but along transit service corridors. And so looking at this map, if you're familiar with the transit system in the Twin Cities, it's not very surprising, but it quantifies very, very clearly what areas are connected to jobs by transit. And one additional piece of information that's necessary when we're talking about transit is to mention that this is averaged over the 7 to 9 a.m. period, and it reflects variations in service levels of transit during that period. Again, we'll come back to this, but I want to get a concrete example of accessibility up on the board before we get a bit more theoretical. So this is transit accessibility to jobs within the Twin Cities metropolitan area. So we'll back up just a little bit and ask first, what is accessibility and why is it important? I like to say that accessibility is actually the answer to another question. What's the purpose of a transportation system? These are very expensive systems. They're complicated systems. They involve a whole lot of effort from a whole lot of people across the country to implement them and to keep them working. Why do we do all of this? In a sense, as transportation researchers and practitioners, we're sort of saying, why do we exist? And when we talk about this in a university setting, one of the things that comes up in classes is students say, well, the purpose of transportation is to move people around, to move goods around. And I always try to push back on that and say, well, is it about individual people? Or are we saying, okay, we're going to take you and get you over to here, and then you and get you over to here? We simply don't have enough information about where people want to go to achieve that. Instead, we build transportation systems that can serve a wide variety of purposes, that can allow people to take specific trips that we don't even know about yet. So transportation, instead of satisfying specific A to B needs, is about creating opportunities. It's about making connections between places that make those places more valuable to the people who live there and who need to travel around. So an example of an accessibility metric is these accessibility maps that we looked at a moment ago. From any point, we can measure how many jobs can be reached from that location. That's a measure of the opportunity that people at that location are exposed to. And it lets us talk very concretely about how the transportation system fulfills its purpose of creating connections between people and the destinations that matter to them. So how does this contrast with the concept of mobility? Mobility is a good thing. Mobility is very important. Mobility measures the ease of movement, how easy it is to move around in space, to get to a different point. So how does that contrast? What's the difference between mobility and accessibility? Well, mobility is sort of a component of accessibility. You've got to be able to move around. But moving around by itself isn't very valuable if it doesn't get you somewhere useful. You can imagine a transportation system where you could move very, very fast, but there wasn't anywhere to go to. Imagine that someone plopped you down on a racetrack and said, okay, you can drive 200 miles an hour for as long as you want to. Well, I'd say, well, that's great, but I can't get anywhere. I've got high mobility, but very low accessibility. So mobility looks at how easy it is to move around, how quickly can you move around. Congestion is a good indicator of mobility. But these metrics don't really tell us anything directly about our ability to reach destinations. And that's what accessibility adds to the picture. That's why we think it's so important. So I've been working a lot with Minnesota Department of Transportation, MnDOT. They have actually made a series of pretty significant investments over the past about 10 years researching tools and techniques for evaluating accessibility. And I've talked with them about what are their motivations. Why, as a State Department of Transportation, do they think that this stuff is important? And the answers that, that I hear always come back to really these three things. First of all, they recognize that it's critical to look beyond mobility and congestion. Those are metrics that can tell us important things about the operation of highway systems, but they don't really answer questions about the big picture of a full, robust transportation network and the connectivity that it provides. So they want to look beyond those metrics of mobility and congestion. Second, they talk about the fact that accessibility metrics really support the vision that they have for transportation outcomes. And they're talking about, again, connectivity. How easy is it for people to get to education opportunities, to healthcare opportunities, to employment opportunities? Those are the outcomes, the reasons that they operate transportation in the state of Minnesota. It's not just because people enjoy driving around, it's because people need to drive to get somewhere. Same thing with riding on buses. We don't do it because it's fun, we do it because it serves a purpose, it gets us to a destination. And so that brings up the third point, which is that they recognize that it's very important to make reasonable comparisons across transportation modes. And congestion and mobility metrics are hard to deploy across modes because congestion means something very different in the context of personal auto travel than it does in transit travel or walking travel or bicycle travel. Accessibility is something that can be implemented in a way that's comparable across a variety of modes. And so this really lets MnDOT take a multimodal approach to planning and performance in transportation. The work that we're doing now, our Access Across America project, really builds on local expertise that's been developed by MnDOT and at the University of Minnesota through an Access to Destinations research project that took place over approximately the past 10 years. This established the foundations for doing this sort of work. And it actually created a practical system for evaluating accessibility in the Twin Cities metropolitan area. So these are some of the components that went into the Access to Destinations project. Going back to 2006 was when the very first research phase wrapped up. So MnDOT has a pretty long track record of investing in these sorts of metrics and incrementally developing the tools and expertise that are necessary for applying them on a more wide-scale level. So this is where we were about 4 years ago when we wrapped up the final phase of Access to Destinations. We had, as I said, developed a system for evaluating accessibility in the Twin Cities, and we measured at the TAZ level accessibility to jobs by driving in the case of this map. The color scale is the same as the ones I presented before, so obviously the red areas enjoy very high accessibility to jobs by driving. We also implemented a similar evaluation for transit, again at the same TAZ level. And in 2010, our TAZ definitions divided the region up into about 1,200 transportation analysis zones. And one of the first things we kind of felt after wrapping this up was that TAZs aren't a very good fit for transit. They can be very, very large, especially in core urban areas, relative to the speeds that pedestrians experience when they're walking to and from transit stops. And so they don't really give us the granularity that's necessary for talking really confidently about accessibility by transit. And so we started to think about, well, how can we improve this? How can we make this more useful? And we looked at how might we expand the scope beyond the metro area and also increase the resolution to smaller areas, which are really important for better transit comparisons. We also, as a result of publishing this work, we got some nice feedback from the press, which was really nice to hear, because it's always good to feel like you're on the right track. But some of the writers out there also did a really good job of expressing what's important about accessibility. So the National Review suggests that because accessibility is the metric that talks about getting people to their destinations, it really ought to be what we're looking at when we're talking about frustrations with commutes. Congestion, in this view, is an indicator, but it's not really the thing to measure. And so that was really great to hear coming from the National Review. The Reason Foundation, this one I really like. They really get at this question of the fundamental purpose. Transportation is not an end in itself. Effectively, we're recognizing here that we don't build roads because they're fun to drive on. We don't drive buses around because they're fun to ride on. We provide those services and we make those infrastructure investments because they provide connectivity. They give people the opportunity to access destinations that matter to them. And I agree with them that we should make our transportation systems serve that goal of accessibility. So these were really great to read in recognition of the work that we did with MnDOT. This is also a good point to mention that accessibility isn't a new idea. We didn't invent it here at the University of Minnesota. Kind of the touchstone academic paper about accessibility goes all the way back to 1959. W.G. Hansen, the author cited here, wrote how accessibility shapes land use as his master's thesis at MIT back in 1959. So this has been around for a long, long time, for many decades, and it's been something that's continually researched and refined. The challenge has been moving this into practice. The theory we've got down. The question is, how exactly should we be calculating this stuff? First of all, there are many different ways of expressing and calculating accessibility. And second of all of those ways are actually pretty complicated and have high data requirements and take a lot of computation. So it's really only over the past decade and even the past few years that the whole field of transportation has gotten to the point where we've got the tools and the data and the capability to do this comprehensively instead of looking just at one area and then doing a different evaluation somewhere else. We've reached a point where we can do this systematically, and that's a pretty new thing. So here at the University of Minnesota, the particular flavor of accessibility metric that we're implementing is known as Cumulative Opportunities. That's just a fancy way of saying count the things that you can get to. So it involves a whole lot of travel time calculations, hopefully very, very detailed, like at the block level like I've been talking about. But then once you've calculated those travel times, you simply add up the opportunities that can be reached within a specified threshold. And this has an important benefit of being an actual thing. It's a count of real-world things. It's not an index. We think that that gives it a whole lot of strength in terms of using this in planning processes, especially ones that have a public component to them, because you can say concrete things like you can reach 10,000 jobs within 30 minutes. We find that very, very valuable. Minnesota DOT does as well, and we think that it will help sort of bridge the gap between accessibility theory and research and using accessibility in transportation planning and performance management. So I talked about expanding the scope and increasing the resolution relative to our earlier work. And over the past about year and a half, that's exactly what we've done. We've continued to develop the tools that we've got to the point where instead of focusing on a single metropolitan area, we can talk comprehensively about an entire state. And in fact, we're working right now on expanding this so that we can talk about the entire country using the same calculation methodology. We've also increased the resolution from transportation analysis zones to individual blocks, even when we're operating at the state or national level. So looking at the metropolitan area, you get a whole lot of value in cities from increasing the resolution down to the block level. So we're very happy with the results we've been able to achieve with that. For transit, it's worth mentioning that because these are scheduled transportation systems and the service level varies sometimes dramatically over time, minute to minute, we actually calculate accessibility for every minute. So this is average 7 to 9 a.m. We calculated accessibility at 7 o'clock and then again at 7:01 and then again at 7:02 because based on the transit schedules, each of those departure times provides access to a different level of jobs. The reason that we do this is it gives us an accessibility metric that reflects the service levels, the frequency of transit service, and the way that it changes over the day, which is a really critical important of that particular transportation system. So we've looked at some really detailed maps, but transportation is really about, accessibility is really about the big picture of transportation systems. It's about system evaluation, it's about monitoring, and it's about planning. So maps are nice, but carrying around a big stack of them to all of your planning meetings or having to present pages and pages of maps in meetings with elected officials or in public meetings can be pretty cumbersome and can sometimes obscure the real points. So it's important also to recognize that because accessibility can be calculated at such a detailed level, you can also aggregate it up to useful summaries. As a local example, here in the Twin Cities, we calculated worker-weighted accessibility to jobs for each of the 7 counties that make up our MPO's jurisdiction. So, for example, in the Minnesota County of Washington, the average worker can reach about 167,000 jobs within 20 minutes. you can compare that to the average worker in Hennepin County, where Minneapolis is located, where the average worker experiences 20-minute accessibility to over 700,000 jobs in 20 minutes. So this lets us aggregate up to really any level that we want to, and that's useful for drawing comparisons between different areas. We can also use accessibility as a tool for watching and monitoring changes over time. So in this example here, we evaluated transit accessibility twice, once for 2010 and then once for 2013, using transit schedules as they were published in those 2 different years. And we can see where accessibility increased, marked in sort of bluish green on this map, and where it decreased, marked in kind of a rusty color. So the increases on this map are associated with some very, very specific infrastructure and service improvement projects that were implemented over these years. I won't go into the details of them because they're very local projects. The key thing here is that they show up very clearly, and we can see not just where the project themselves happen, but where the benefits of those projects in terms of accessibility, where they are and how they're distributed across blocks within the city. We can also use this same technique as a planning tool. We can take a current snapshot of accessibility and then compare it to a potential future scenario. In this case, the future scenario is a very simple one. We simply removed a bus route in the city of Minneapolis and said, what would accessibility be like if we stopped running this route? That's a negative example, but you could just as easily do a positive example where we asked, what would happen if we added this route? And once again, the results show us not just how much accessibility would change, but where it changes, which means that we can use this type of approach to answer questions about equity in the transportation planning process. So I've mentioned a couple times that we want to do this at a national scale. And in fact, I guess about 2 months ago, we released our first report that does that. Access Across America Transit 2014 is the first in what we intend to be a series of reports that compares accessibility between metropolitan areas using exactly the same methodology in each location. So in the report, we actually cover 46 of the largest metropolitan areas across the U.S. We're looking here at just an example of 6 of them. The important thing to recognize is that in each of these cities, in Denver, in Minneapolis, in Phoenix, in Portland, in Seattle, in St. Louis, we've calculated accessibility at the same level of detail using the same data sources and the same methodology. So this gives us really an incredible set of data to make comparisons and contrasts across different cities. This is focused on transit. We are working right now on a parallel report that will look at accessibility to jobs by auto across the United States. We'll be able to compare cities on auto accessibility, and we'll also be able to compare auto to transit accessibility and make some multimodal comparisons. So we're really very excited about this work. And one of the things we want to do is make sure that it continues in the future. We're hoping that this will become an ongoing, annually updated database of accessibility that's available to people who want to use it in planning projects. So to make that happen, we're working with the Minnesota Department of Transportation on establishing a pooled fund project. This is the Access Across America project, and the goal here is, like I said, to set accessibility up as an annually updated data source that partners of this project can use for any purpose locally. We don't want to prescribe exactly how accessibility metrics should be employed or what goals should be set. We think the important step right now is to make this something that is measured. We're ready to do that with the state of the tools that we've got. And if you're interested in participating in the pooled fund, the solicitation actually is live as of a couple of weeks ago. So you can find more information about this on our website, and of course I would be happy to talk with you about it. So you can contact me, you can visit our website, and I thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. That was great, and you finished just right on time. And I'm going to go ahead and let's see if Rich, I think you're unmuted now. I'm going to go ahead and give control over to Rich, and he can continue the webinar and tell us about what he's doing in Maryland and Virginia. Rich?
Yeah.
There you go. Okay.
Okay. I didn't know if I had to initiate it. Thanks, Robbie.
Yep.
I guess I'd like to start by extending kudos to Andrew and his folks at University of Minnesota. They've really been vanguards on this whole accessibility thing, and it's an important, really important issue. And you know, they deserve a lot of credit for the time they've been putting into it and increasing understanding. You'll see a lot of similarities, I think, nicely between what I'm going to talk about and what Andrew did, some points I'm going to make. If there's a difference between us, it's that, probably because we're planners, we're more focused on trying to use this information as stepstone to better planning tools and decision making. So you'll see that as you know, pretty strongly in my presentation here.
Muted.
So I'll get this in a second. So why the recent interest in accessibility? As Andrew points out, it's been around forever. I mean, we've been looking at this for a long time, and I guess that probably one big reason might be Map 21. We've really seen a new raised bar on the desire to see performance-based approaches being used in planning and decision-making. Naturally, that's filtered its way down to the states and DOTs as they develop their plans, and they're looking for better measures. And probably the most essential measure that's out there of transportation performance is accessibility. As Andrew pointed out, what it does is it tells you about opportunity. It's about connecting people with activities and getting goods to places more than moving a thing on a particular facility. What's important about accessibility, one of its many nice characteristics, is that it reflects the synergy between the built environment or land use and the transportation system, which is really essential. I mean, these two have to complement each other. And as we all know, the decisions in those camps are made by very different people, and there are reasons why we haven't been able to talk to each other, but accessibility is beginning to provide us with a method for being able to get across that divide, I think. Accessibility, the way we're treating it, if it's applied across modes, it allows you to compare those modes and quantify the number and quality of travel choices, which gets us at the true multimodal desires that should be part of our plan. So that's accessibility. What doors does it open for us? Again, you know, we're going to come at this from an analytic point of view. We see that there's the chance for a really enhanced analytic capability for planning agencies and decision makers. And the reason for this, I think, is that the advancements in GIS tools and data over the past 10, 15 years have just been extraordinary, and they've been a game changer. They've really allowed us to take pictures of things at a much finer level of detail. And when it comes to things like land use and non-motorized travel and transit, as Andrew was saying, you really got to get down to that level below with the current travel models that they're able to give us. If you're able to do that, we're hoping that we can really sharpen decision making. The measures are, as you can see from his work, are really intuitive. They tell you stories just by looking at the pictures. Because you're working in a mapping media, they're visually compelling. It puts the modes on a more equal footing and begins to shift the focus from moving people and goods rather than solving congestion, assuming that's something we could really do. And very importantly, it tries to bridge that divide on land use and transportation decisions. It begins to provide a media for people to talk. We've been working on trying to extend accessibility into the realm of planning tools, and we've had a number of projects that have given us the laboratory to do that. I'm going to talk about two of them today that are kind of more on the researchy side, but I think they're very apropos. The first is NCHRP 878, which was about developing new methods for estimating bike and pedestrian travel. The second one is the work that Kate's going to be here to help back me up on. We are doing a research application of this tool at a true multimodal level in a major corridor with very interesting findings. We've also been applying it in regular sort of planning projects, Asheville, Montgomery County as part of a major redevelopment at White Flint, Central Manatee County in Florida, and each time we do one of these, we get a little better sense of how to treat the tool and how to use it and what its capabilities may be. So, real quick background on 878, because that's where this thing started. We worked for several years on this project to try to close the gap in methods to estimate bike walk demand. Anybody that's worked with traditional regional TAZ models know that they're just too coarse to get down to that level of granularity. And so it leaves a lot of unanswered questions on the table. What is the role of land use? How important are facility investments? Where should you be making those facility investments for bike and walk? What's the impact on motorized travel, both auto as well as transit, because walk access to transit is very critical. The result of this was a lot of new original research, resulting in a practitioner guidebook that got released this August by NCHRP. It was Report 770. It's available on the web for free and has a lot of good stuff in it. One of the major products out of that guidebook was a GIS accessibility model we developed using data from Arlington, Virginia, and I'm going to talk about that. But before I do, as we've tried to operationalize accessibility into more of a planning construct, we've seized upon a simple framework that's actually been very powerful to us. And what it does is it says accessibility is an equation that in effect has land use in the numerator, and land use includes all those opportunities we're talking about. That as you look across the landscape, it's the number and the type and the proximity of those things that are there. And the denominator is the transportation network, and it's the wiring that connects all those things and provides the opportunity. So we're basically talking about travel time as determined by things like connectivity, directness, and safety. Now, we take those layers. We're able to do the connection between those two, the numerator and denominator, using GIS very effectively. So this is that process in operation. Here's we're using for the land use layer, or the land use element, is InfoUSA employment data, and through that we're able to show at a point level, specific coordinates, all the employment in an area by 4-digit NAIC code, the number of employees, and again, specific location. And then for our transportation layer, we're going to digitize networks, and we're using the NAVTEC system. We could use the MPO networks, but they tend not to include all of the streets, where NAVTEC does. In fact, MPOs are now making more use of NAVTEC because it has that extra ability. We then went in and actually manually edited these networks to make sure that all the bike ped facilities were in, and if there were constraints on using them, like you couldn't get onto an interstate highway with a bicycle and so forth, we were able to code that into the links. This data came to us through a partnership arrangement with the Washington Council of Governments, the local MPO, that also gave us their current travel survey data that would also have the same kind of geographic specificity, so we could begin to link the two together. We wanted to do something that looked like WalkScore. Everybody knows about WalkScore. That had that kind of intuitive simplicity, but yet gave us enough real oomph to come up with real relationships. And so the technique we're using is kind of simplistically here. We calculate the score as the number of opportunities of a particular type you can get to in relation to the travel time it takes to get there. This is very similar to what Andrew is doing. Over the actual networks, this isn't crow-fly distances. This is really defined by the network that's there, so you can begin to see how important that is. If you can improve the network, you can conceivably cut down the distance and time to get to some of these opportunities. And then we compile these into a score that is sort of like a cumulative opportunities, but it's been discounted by the time. And more importantly, we throw in a decay factor. And the decay factor says that the farther I have to travel, the less important, the less valuable that opportunity is to me. So I'm going to further discount those opportunities that are farther away from me. So I don't have to draw a line to show how far I'm going to go in a particular mode. And in fact, I just run out of interest based on the decay relationship, and that determines my effective perimeter for where I'm going to travel. These are what those decay curves look like. We get these from the travel survey. Their trip distribution data just shows the frequency of people traveling a certain travel time in this case. And you can see how those curves drop off very rapidly as you have to go additional distances. Right? We do this. Here you're looking at curves for work trips, and for non-work trips. They're different, and we do this for all modes and all travel purposes. Now, we also do this, as I said, for all modes, and this is kind of a simple graphic of what we're doing. So take a given point, say a trip end for a traveler, and we do this summation and calculation of a score for walk, for bike, for transit, for auto, over their effective service area, and we have that decay curve. We're summing everything into a total score. That's what this area under the curve represents, and that becomes the metric that we start to compare things on. To show what those look like, what those rates look like, and what we do with them, here's an example from the Washington, D.C. area. We took 3 areas that are categorically different. We have a place, Logan Circle, that's the sort of ground zero for walking, biking, transit, right in the middle of Washington. We have a place, Clarendon, that's an evolving TOD on Metro's Orange Line, and we have a typical suburban subdivision, McLean. And we calculated the scores using that technique that I just showed you. And they're posted over here in this graph, in this set of graphs. So the blue is auto. No surprise, it's highest because there's so much stuff out there that you can get to with auto because it's a higher speed. The yellow is the score for transit. The red is the score for walk. The green is the score for bike. And let's not ask about right now why that's so much higher. I think there's a very interesting story behind it, and which you can get to by bicycle. But what this is demonstrating is how much higher Logan Circle's accessibilities are than Clarendon and then McLean. And maybe the thing that's initially really sort of surprising is, well, God, you got this really high auto accessibility for Logan Circle, and hardly anybody drives or even owns a car there. What's that telling us? Well, to get to the answer, you really got to start looking at the relationships across the modes. And if we compared Logan Circle's auto score with that of McLean, we'd see that Logan Circle had a comparative advantage of like 4.2 to 1, which is pretty impressive. However, if you compare their scores on transit, it's 13 to 1. If you compare them on bike, it's 15 to 1. And on walk, it's almost 40 to 1. So that's no surprise when you go back and compare that with what we're seeing on the ground through the travel surveys. Logan Circle has a non-motorized mode share rate of 41%, Clarendon 21%, 8%. So very strong relationships to want to come out of the data. So what we tried to do is find a way to statistically connect this stuff, and we didn't go so far as to start doing actual demand modeling per se. We tried doing associative stuff with statistics, and so follow me here, please. What we did is for every point in the travel survey, every trip end, we put that trip into a category defined by its walk score range. So this is 0 to 200, 200 to 400, and so forth. And then we looked at the modes that were chosen in that particular category. So, for example, these are work trips. You're seeing that relatively few trips were observed that were made by walking, about less than 30% by transit, more than 70% by auto. Now, as walk score increases and you're getting more and more urban and accessibility is going up, you'll see that walk increases, transit increases, and auto is coming down. We see that at both the origin and destination in somewhat different relationships. We see it for non-work travel even more so. What's interesting is that walking becomes much more important for non-work than transit, just because most walk trips are fairly short. And on the work side, very few people have the opportunity to walk to work because it's so far away. So we were able to take those relationships, turn them into equations, and go down to the block level and begin to compute. Again, we were trying to do walk bike, walk trip productions and attractions at a block level, and by doing that, we're also able to then connect them and create trip flows, and effectively a trip table. We did this, I'm showing an example for the town of Shirlington here that has a kind of a town center here and lots of residential out here, you know, nice, compact, mixed-use, growing community. We had the opportunity with that being active to go and actually look at and assess the network and flows. And what we saw was we were surprised that on the west side of town, where there were these big high-rises and a lot of productions potentially, fairly little stuff was going over to the attractions over in the town center. And when we took a look at the maps, we realized that we found that the county maintenance facilities were sort of occupying a critical place right between these two areas. And by virtue of the model, we were able to run links through this blocked area and create effectively 500 new walk trips, which we will also presume came out of auto to get there. So just to show how effective, how easy it is to do this with the tool, I will tell you this tool is available in the Report 770 material packages. It's on a CD-ROM that you can download. Spreadsheet forms, got sample data, and you can play with this yourself if you wish to. Move on to Maryland DOT. This is taking the process up from kind of walk-bike to looking across all the modes in a larger scale. So we've been working with the department for a couple of years on analytic tools. They realized that as they start getting into trickier and trickier questions with multimodality and such, that they really the tools they've had available are just kind of not fit for the job. So we have been looking at options that could either supplement what they've got or substitute in sort of strategic ways. Among those tools was this 878 accessibility model you just saw, and they liked it and suggested that we might just try to do a pilot study in some corridor. Treat it as a research project because we're just trying to see whether it works and what it'll do. And so we've been working on that, and we're nearing the end of that work right now. I'll talk to you about it a bit. The corridor was pretty substantial. It's for any of you who know Washington, this is the Maryland 355 through 70 corridor. It goes from D.C. up to Frederick. 355, State 355, known as Rockville Pike, used to be the main traveled way. Long since lost its place to I-270, and so it became more of a sort of main street for this area. The development, as you guess, is really quite varied. It's very dense and urban at the southern end, and it just keeps transitioning to get rural toward the northern end in Clarksburg. It is multimodal in the sense that we've got Metro's red line going up through here to Shady Grove. We've got commuter rail service coming through the corridor, and the county has been studying a BRT network to supplement what's there already. But the fact of the matter is that most of the growth, most of the development in this corridor is really very auto-oriented, picture strip shopping malls and so forth. And the plan is to convert this into something more like a linear city over time, which is a really a very positive goal, given that if this place continues to grow as it has, the capacity that's there is going to be severely taxed, and there's a real question about the sustainability of that. So we're looking to see if this tool can give us some insights on what those possibilities might be. So we took those same tools we developed for WashCog, and this is the corridor. We went in and calculated our accessibilities, first for work, this is auto, and non-work. And we're using total jobs, discounted jobs for the work accessibilities. And we're using selected number of retail and service establishments to get at the non-work side. You can see the expected rainbow pattern, just like we saw in Andrew's work. Strongest toward the district where most of the major jobs are, weakest going out to the county line and rural areas. Not much east to west because there really is not much east to west capacity, and most of the jobs are found within the corridor, so no surprises there. Did the same thing for transit. You'll see the rainbow patterning, but what you'll also start seeing very interestingly is the presence of development around the transit nodes. You're seeing the highest rates of accessibility clustered in those areas. No surprise. When you get down to walk, yes, and we can do walk, it's an even different look, and part of the reason is we're now shifting down to a block level of detail, so it's much finer. And you'll see that the places where you really have walk accessibility are pretty limited to the developed areas in the corridor in the town centers that are there and around Metro. And there's a lot of stuff even in the down county where it's gray and it means there's really not much to walk to there. You might have sidewalks, but the true accessibility is not there. We faced that same issue that Andrew did about transit really needs to be looked at a finer level than a TAZ. And unfortunately, the only data we had from the MPO's model was at TAZ level. And we wanted to find a way to get it down to the block level. And we realized that the red lines here are the TAZs, and the dots are transit stops and such. You see Metro. These colors show how much time it takes to walk to the nearest transit stop. And so having the walk networks, we developed a routine that allows us to figure out how long it is to walk from each block to the nearest effective transit stop, and then discount the TAZ level accessibility to show what would happen at the block. And we use those same decay rates as you saw in the blue curves earlier. So if you're within 1 minute of the stop, you get virtually full credit for the TAZ accessibility. If it's 5 minutes away, you're down to 70%. 10 minutes, you're down to half. 20 minutes, you're down to about a quarter. It's different for work and non-work. We use that information to develop a whole new set of equations. I'm not going to get into them here because it just isn't enough time, other than to say that this is a whole step above what we had done in NCHRP. These are really multimodal equations. We're including in calculating the mode share for each mode, the accessibility scores of each of the other modes. And all I can tell you is the models have very strong estimation statistics. We ballpark them against census and empirical data. They come in very nicely. They seem to work very well. So we're still refining this, but these equations now are allowing us to do some interesting things. So we can take, this is the map of one of the lower planning areas, Bethesda, Chevy Chase. You can see the block structure. We have adjusted the transit accessibility to show what it is at a block level. And then we've taken that accessibility, along with the ones for walking and for auto, and calculated the mode choice for at each block. So here it's showing for walk. This is for work travel. Here it is for auto. Here it is for walking. That was transit above, right? And you can really begin to see, if you go back to the transit slide, how important it is for transit to be able to get down below the TAZ to really see what the opportunity is and the likelihood is of using transit. This makes that very important. We often can't see that in our TAZ models. Finishing up here, there are a lot of ways you could play with this data, and one of them is patterning. What we've done here is create simplistic place types. So we took all of the blocks and we categorized them by the level of their transit score. We put them into ranges, 5, and by their walk score. And then we sort of combine those two, because as much as you'd like to think that they're one-to-one, where you have good transit, you don't always have good walking and so forth. And then pattern them out in the corridor. And for any one of these areas, we can tell you what the likely mode split is based on this category. And so this has a lot of capacity to be transferred on to use developing place types for planning. One thing we might be talking about with the state. Let me give you a quick summary of my observations and then clear the way for Kate to get her comments in. There's no doubt that accessibility is a powerful measure. I think it should be a primary measure in our planning and decision making. I'm pretty sure that it will be based on the way things are going. The measures and maps are appealing because they communicate a lot of information very simply and effectively. And the good thing about that is it encourages participation. More people can understand it. More people can participate and own the planning process. GIS is a major factor. The fact that it's much more than mapping, it's a new math for creating relationships, is giving us much more power than we had before. Really importantly, the accessibility framework encourages synergistic planning. If we have these two camps of the people that make land use and transportation decisions and we know they need to be joined, this may be a media by which we can begin to have those people communicate across a variety of levels. So I think I'm going to leave it at that. Now, Kate, I didn't give you much time, but if you want to have some comments in here, please join in.
Sure, thanks. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Thanks, Rich. Yeah, so I would agree with Rich's summary of this work, and I just wanted to take a few minutes to add a little bit of perspective on MDOT's interest in this work and some of the potential applications that we're exploring. So, not unlike probably most everywhere in the country, our state plans and a lot of our local plans are more and more looking to develop these urban multimodal places. So as a transportation agency, our charge is to make sure that the transportation system is growing and changing in step with that. And so while we're still charged with managing congestion and safety, we have to be relying much more on multimodal solutions. And so we're not just solving for congestion or capacity. As both Andrew and Rich kind of said, what we're solving for, what we're trying to provide is accessibility, which is a much broader picture and I think a much more user-focused picture of what people are looking for in terms of their ability to move around. Most of the transportation tools that we have available that we've been using for years are really focused on predicting auto trips and congestion, and they don't focus on what's happening with the other modes and what's really influencing use of other modes. So we often just sort of assume that walking and transit or other modes are either constant, or we kind of pick an assumption about, well, it's going to be 10% walk mode share or 20% walk mode share, but the tools aren't really designed to help us reliably predict what that share should be. So, we've done some work. We do supplementary surveys and we do negotiations and discussions and things like that, but ultimately, we really needed and need tools that are really focused on what those dynamics are for other modes and speak to that full transportation picture that our stakeholders are asking us for. So, our transportation analysis, we're not just looking at congestion and capacity, we're adding safety, we're adding all the other modes, but we're really excited about what the accessibility tool kind of brings to our wheelhouse. It's focused specifically on walk scale experience, so it helps us provide input to our traditional congestion kind of work, but it really, I think, helps have the conversation and support decision making that looks at the full multimodal perspective. I think that from our perspective, there's kind of two main pieces of this accessibility tool. There's the descriptive mapping, all these sort of color-coded place type maps that Rich showed, and just those in and of themselves we think are really useful tools for our staff internally to kind of understand what's going on with the land use, where we have hot spots, maybe where we should be focusing pedestrian or transit interventions, that kind of thing, to share with stakeholders. I mean, the visuals of what's happening in the corridor, a corridor for transit accessibility or something like that, we think is really powerful. We also have seen and want to continue work just generally putting out information to the public about accessibility and thinking about location efficiency and the value of accessible places and trying to encourage that kind of location and development. And, and these accessibility maps, I think, also are really going to be helpful for us to have dialogues with local jurisdictions and land use authorities about, when they're planning different land uses, how that's going to impact transportation and vice versa. We don't control land use by any means or direct land use, but obviously it's a close relationship, and having a tool that kind of helps us show the back and forth of what's happening between the two, I think, can help us work together more effectively. And then the other piece, so that's kind of the mapping side of this, the other piece is the mode share equations, and that gets into the quantitative side of this of all sorts of stuff that we could use this for, looking at ridership estimates, supporting better ridership estimates for transit, estimating pedestrian demand, thinking about mode split assumptions like I mentioned, thinking about what sort of performance measures we're using for project decisions and other types of monitoring. So there's lots of potential applications we hope to explore with this tool, and think that we're just getting started with it. We don't see this as competing with or replacing other models that we have, but we really think that it adds a more complete and more reliable picture to the multimodal world that we're all living in. and we really think it's going to be valuable for helping us, when we go out to the public or we go out and talking about project decisions, giving that full picture and talking about accessibility is what people are actually after, rather than just congestion and a few other metrics. We really think that this is going to be a valuable tool for us. So I'll leave it there. I guess, I don't know if Robbie's going to handle questions or how we're doing that.
Yes, thank you. We do have some questions, and I know that we're at an hour, but we still have quite a few people on. If people can stick around, we're going to go ahead and take questions. But if you do have to jump off, if any of the participants have to jump off, I wanted to remind you that we will have this up on the SSTI website by tomorrow. Both the slide sets so that you can run through those if you want to, and also a recording of the webinar will be up on our website. And you can sign up for our SSTI newsletter, follow us on Twitter, and get more information about our work at ssti.us. And if you do have a question, you can type it into the little box on the bottom of there's a chat box on the right side of your screen. If you don't see it, you might have to hit the orange arrow in the upper right to bring up that chat box. But I'm going to go ahead and let my colleague Mary Ebeling, who's been scrolling through the questions, go ahead and handle those. And if the panelists will unmute themselves so that they can answer, that would be great. Thanks.
Muted.
All right. Hi, everybody, and thanks again for being on this amazingly, wonderfully informative webinar today. I will start, we do have a bunch of questions. I will start with probably the most straightforward question. It is not addressed towards anyone specific. It was concerning accessibility scores. Was parking for automobiles considered in the or parking availability when developing auto accessibility scores?
I guess that goes to me, Rich. The answer is no, and that question has been wisely raised by several people. We have a lot of capacity in this tool to tweak those accessibilities, the impedances, to reflect all kinds of costs, and that's where we're moving in the longer term. For example, for walking or biking, things like slope and difficult crossings and that sort of stuff matter, and they put an extra weight on the scores. We know about the parking concern, and that's something that's on our list to try to work into a more generalized cost framework. But yes, good point.
All right. This question is for Andrew specifically. When you say you can reach 10,000 jobs within 30 minutes, where is the starting point for measuring that time? For transit, does that include the walk trip on both ends of the trip? On the other side, for a drive trip, does it include door-to-door time?
Right. Thank you for the question. So we do our calculations from block centroid to block centroid. And beyond that, we try to include as much detail about the journey as we can. So on the driving side, it's not quite door-to-door. This sort of actually gets to the parking question as well. Driving trips typically aren't door-to-door. They're door-to-parking to door, or sometimes door-to-parking to parking to door. Unfortunately, there's just not enough data out there right now outside of dedicated surveys and data collection to do the parking component. On the transit, we include all of the pedestrian components of the trip as well. So walking to a transit stop, waiting for a bus to come, traveling on the vehicle, whether it's a bus or a train, of course, making a transfer, that might involve some walking and waiting, and then walking to the final destination. So we try to be very comprehensive in that. And that's part of the reason why we calculate at multiple departure times, because, of course, the waiting components of those trips will vary from minute to minute. And so that's why we measure at multiple departure times and then an average over time periods of interest.
Excellent. This next question is also for you, Andrew. How have cumulative opportunities changed the way transportation investment decisions are being made?
Yeah, so this is kind of a specific case of really what is the right question to ask next. Okay, we can calculate this stuff. What do we do with it? Rich actually has shown some great examples of how to apply this stuff. We can use it to help understand and predict people's behavior. So if we can get better at predicting mode share, that can let us allocate resources a little bit better. Another concrete example, we're working with our local transit agency here in the Twin Cities to run an accessibility analysis of their short-term service improvement plan. So they've actually got like specific frequency increases on specific routes at specific times, and we're going to be able to map out the differences that those will make in terms of accessibility. However, all that said, I think that this is really kind of, that's really kind of the next step. We're sort of at this in-between point where we're saying, okay, we can measure this stuff. We're starting to have big piles of accessibility data whenever we want to have it. But we still need to develop this community of practice in terms of what do we do with it, how do we make decisions, how do we set goals. That's something that is going to have to keep evolving as organizations start to incorporate data into their processes.
All right. Does anybody else have any comments? I know that Andrew specifically referenced cumulative opportunities, but has anybody else who presented, Kate had experience on this, or Rich? As far as how investments are made.
Well, I think Andrew's right that we're just starting to explore this. So the work that Rich described that his group did for us was a pilot study, and we're very encouraged by the outcomes of it, and we're looking to apply it to some forthcoming work, and we see a lot of different applications of it. But I think there's still a ways to go in really understanding how these tools get balanced with other tools that are out there, and making sure that folks are comfortable using them for investment decisions and other types of decisions and stuff. So I think developing the community of practice, seeing this grow and learning from each other's examples in order to make sure we're using this in sort of sensible and robust ways is it's going to evolve over the coming years.
I will throw this in, Robbie. This is Rich. We are beginning work with the state of Virginia that is redoing its long-range plan, and it's using accessibility as one of the key measures. And in fact, there was a subsequent bill, House Bill 2, that was passed that develops guidelines for prioritizing projects based on 5 criteria. One of those key criteria is accessibility. So we're working with them. Actually, I think SSTI is involved in this process too, because it's a fairly wide open process as they try to feel their way into this new area. But I see it as having a really major role in that vanguard effort.
All right. We have 2 more questions that have come in, and I think there's still enough people on the line that we should go ahead and answer them. And this is sort of broader to whomever in the group wants to jump in. One benefit of the travel time calculations approach is comparability, but it seems that several tables were showing free flow speeds. Obviously, travel time reliability is a major influence on accessibility. Was travel time reliability included in the analysis?
Yeah, I can grab that since I think I'm the one who put the words free flow on the screen. So the map of Minnesota that I showed for auto accessibility was indeed based on free flow speeds on the road network. And that was simply because for that particular project, the scope of that project didn't include collecting or purchasing data on actual speeds. However, the earlier work, the 2010 work that I showed, includes actual speed measurements. So this is sort of why our name is the Accessibility Observatory. The goal is to look at what speeds actually are on the roadway, or really what they were on average over the trailing year or something like that. and calculate accessibility based on that. That approach, incorporating actual congestion measurements and actually measured speeds on the roadways, is what we'll be employing in the pooled fund study.
All right. Does anybody else have a comment on that?
The closest we come to it is that we are using whatever the prevailing speed is for that situation, train that is congested or not. We tend to use constrained times for our work analysis and unconstrained, that is free flow, for the others. If there was a way to mathematically translate reliability to that, to the presentation of travel time, then we could certainly account for it directly in the accessibilities.
All right. I have one more question that's come in, and this one is for Andrew again. Whether you calculated times using local travel demand models, and if so, how did you disaggregate the travel times, especially for transit, from the larger TAZs to block level?
Yeah, so all of the speeds that we use, and in fact all of the work that we do, or have done so far, we specifically use measured speeds rather than modeled speeds. So in the case of auto, that means speeds measured via loop detector,
Unmuted.
GPS, which usually means commercial data sets. In the case of transit, that means using the actual published schedules. For every single trip, we have time points at every single stop. And so we don't use a regional level abstracted model. We use the actual published timetables from every transit operator. So we don't have to worry about aggregating or anything like that. We know the exact coordinate of every stop, and we know the exact time that every vehicle is scheduled to stop at.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I'm going to just, there we go. I want to thank all of our presenters and everybody who stuck around until the end of the question session. This was an extremely interesting topic, and if you have questions about any of the slides or any of the speakers, the slides will be up later on today, and a recording of the webinar will be up tomorrow. And again, I'd like to invite everyone to go to the SSTI website and subscribe to our newsletter, follow us on Twitter. You'll be able to get notice of future webinars and topics that we put out.